Hello, good evening. So I'm launching a new series on my channel. Doesn't that just sound so grand and completely out of my league? Basically, I want to start a series of videos on my channel called Pastry and Poetry. And in this video series, I'm going to be baking pastry and reading poetry and talking about pastry and poetry. I just wanted to combine two of my passions, which is baking and reading and writing poetry, and trying to uncover what is poetry, because that's a very tough subject for me. Also, I'm a sucker for alliteration, so yes, pastry and poetry is here to stay. This is episode 1, an introductory episode where I'm going to tell you what the hell this is and why you should be watching it. Basically, I've always been writing. When I was 6 years old, my grandfather gave me a typewriter, and I was like, oh, now I don't have to do it by hand. So I started doing my own newspaper for the household and things like that. But even though I liked to write prose and poetry and I liked to read a lot, I always thought that writing was a kind of arcane sphere and that only incredibly smart people could do it. People who had some kind of divine intervention in their life that allowed them to be a writer. I don't know why I thought that. I was a child. I was very small when I'm like 7 years old, I'm saying. And even when I was 12, I remember I was reading 100 Years of Solitude, which became my favorite book. I still thought that I could never write anything like that, even though while I was reading that book, I was thinking that it reminds me a lot of situations and strange things that happened with my own family, and that it inspired me to write something about my family. But it always seemed to me like I could never be a writer. So even though I've been writing my whole life, and now I'm finally thinking about trying to finish one of my manuscripts, I'm working on a book of poetry, I'm working on some fantasy, I still feel a little intimidated by the world of literature. And poetry is a complicated thing because everybody has their own opinion on it. A lot of people think it's pretentious. A lot of people just think they don't understand it and that they need some kind of special knowledge or special permission to be able to appreciate poetry, which is not true. You can read and appreciate poetry whoever you are and whatever you do and, whatever your background is. But for me, poetry is a complicated sphere. I want to uncover it. I want to delve deep into different genres of poetry, into all the little nitty-gritty mechanical aspects of composing poetry. I want to read books about poetry, and I want to read books from as many poets as I possibly can, discover what I like, discover some new and exciting poets for myself, and I just want to have fun with it. And while I'm doing that, I'm going to be baking. I'm not very good at baking. I can do it and I can make some pretty good things, but I often improvise with recipes, which doesn't always lead to good results. But we're going to try and do a bunch of things together. If you want to recommend me some recipes or recommend me some poetry, I would love that. So if you have any recommendations, please leave them in the comments down below. And now, please, let's move on to my first baking and my first poetry readings for this episode. All right, now let's go to the shop and get some ingredients for pastry. I thought that I would make the pastry myself at first, but then I decided that I'm not going to make a dessert today. I'm going to make a savory pastry for dinner, which means that I can just get some puff pastry from the shop, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get some puff pastry and some ingredients for something that I already have in mind. Hello, princess. Say hi. Say hi to the esteemed viewers. Say hello. I'm a little princess. I'm a little bit sick today, but I'm okay. Mama's taking care of me. Yes, princess? Yes. Hello again. I took Alice to the vet. She has a little thing. She's got cystitis. She'll be fine. I got all of her meds. She feels okay. She's napping, so everything's okay, but I'm going to stay here for a while so I can take her to the vet again tomorrow. And I got all the ingredients for my pastry. I am so excited to make it. I really also want to make it like pretty. try to do, I don't even know, like patterned pastry on top. I'll try, but it's probably not gonna work because all of my attempts in the past did not go well. And also, I'm suddenly craving to go to the bookshop, even though I bought so many books this month. There's gonna be a book haul later, sometime later. But I want to go to the bookshop because I realized that I don't have a lot of poetry books on hand. I have a few of them. They were here, but I took them home to where I live right now, and they're there. So right now here, I don't have any poetry books on hand to read. I'm going to read them on Scribd, a few of them. I'm going to go on Scribd and choose what they have and some poetry there. But I also feel like I have felt this for a while, that I don't have a good collection of poetry that I can read. And it's because a lot of the time in bookshops where you can just walk in and look at the selection, they either have Shakespeare, which I have, or like modern poetry like Atticus and no. So I want to go to the bookshop and explore and see if they'll have anything, like at least one poetry book that I can add to my collection today. Should I? Alright, hello, Editing Jane here. At this point, I gotta jump in and explain a couple of things. I realize now, while I'm watching all of this footage, I have so much, that this video is a mess. In the future, in the series, there's going to be more structure, I promise. Also, no shade to Atticus or anybody who likes his poetry. What I meant by that is that, like, I want more variety. I want something between Shakespeare and Atticus, not just Shakespeare and Atticus, right? Also, like, when there's like two poetry books in the whole shop, Shakespeare and Atticus, I feel like that's a failing on the bookshop's part. There's so much more out there. So yes, let's go back to the mess right now. I'm so sorry for the way this video is structured. Okay, we're at the bookshop. We're gonna choose something. We as a society need to stop doing film covers. No. I want this. Oh, these collector's editions, they haunt me. We're in Yusk, which is like IKEA, but Yusk. And I want one of these for my TBRs, for my monthly TBRs. And I'm lost. I love them all. What do I do? Got a new toy for Alice from this fabric that's not going to be easily broken. It crinkles and squeaks, and she loves it. This is the first time me giving it to her outside the shop. Yes, excellent. Oh, little doggo. Alright, welcome to the kitchen. For my pastry, I'm going to make a puff pastry pie with potatoes, spinach, and shrimp. It's not a recipe I found somewhere, I just came up with it, so I'll put the directions down in the description, so if you like it, you can also make it. I think it's a very simple recipe because it's just like ingredients that I like and I'm putting them in the puff pastry and putting them in the oven. So it's probably going to be very easy. I haven't decided what poetry I'm going to read yet. I'm going to go on my Scribd right now and decide. it's been in the oven for 20 minutes and it burnt on top. I didn't think it was gonna burn so fast. I don't know why. I guess I didn't use puff pastry for a long time, so I suppose it's ready. Right, so puff pastry isn't actually something that you do these like shaped tops with. I just felt like trying it. Where I had some extra here on the side, it puffed up because it's puff, but it looks fine. It looks okay. I'm gonna cut off a piece and see what we have. Right, I took a spatula like a normal person. Here's the way it looks. Okay. Alright, so I tried my little pine. For those of you who want to try and make it, who thought that looked good, here's the recipe. Just take puff pastry, any kind of baking shape that you like. Put a little bit oil down, put the puff pastry down. You boil potatoes, you boil or like half boil shrimp or prawn, whatever you like, and you take shredded spinach. You can take fresh spinach and just cut it up a little bit, and that's what I would have preferred in this, but I just took frozen shredded spinach. You add spices and salt, and I didn't add enough, so don't be afraid of the spices and salt. Like, add as much as you want, and because all of this stuff is pre-cooked, it's going to be easy for you to try it before putting it into the pie to make sure that the spices and salt are to your liking. Then you just put the stuffing onto the puff pastry and you cover it up with more pastry. You can do it like hatch, like I did, or you can just cover it with a layer. Do whatever you like. Tastes okay. Tastes nice. Sort of like what I wanted it to be. And also, I didn't put the whole bag of shrimp in because shrimp is expensive. And I was like, no, don't put the whole bag in. I should have put the whole bag in because there's not enough shrimp in that thing. Oh, also, I put a little bit of shredded cheese on the very top. And again, you can do more of that if you're a cheese person. I'm a cheese person, and that was not enough cheese. So it's okay. It's a nice little pastry to start off the series. And let's go to some poetry now. All right. In this episode, we'll be going through two poetry books that I have. Victorian Cottage Garden. I thought, to be honest, that this was like an illustration book, and then I looked at it and I'm thinking, why is it on my poetry shelf? So I looked at it, and it's a poetry collection. It's a very small, sweet, beautiful poetry collection with illustrations of Victorian cottage gardens from different authors. This was published in 1996, and this is a limited edition apparently, which is cool because I got it at a secondhand bookshop for $1. And like with all collections, if I like any poems from this particularly, I'm going to look up the poets and maybe I'll read them in future episodes. And the next book that we're going to be taking poems from to read for this episode is this Percy Shelley collection, which was published in 1959 in Moscow in the Soviet Union, which is cool because it's a book that's published in a place that doesn't exist anymore. I know Moscow exists, but the Soviet Union doesn't, you know what I mean. And this has a lot of his poems and a few short stories, a few stories in prose at the end of it. So I'm not obviously going to read this in a few days. I don't read poetry like that. So we're going to take a few poems from here. I don't know if I'm just going to start from the beginning or if I'm going to go through the index and just choose whatever names appeal to me. But yeah, let's start. I just went on Goodreads and this has 0 ratings. 0 people have read this on Goodreads. Why? A little baby book. It's gonna be the first. That's adorable. Right, so I'm probably going to finish this thing in one sitting because most of the poems are just a tiny little stanza from a bigger poem, I think. So it's gonna be a good idea for me to Google most of these authors later. And they're mostly like this. The kiss of the sun for pardon, the song of the birds for mirth. One is nearer God's heart in the garden than anywhere else on earth. I think it's lovely. I think it's just beautiful. And I think it's a book that would just make you feel a little bit better on a bad day. It has these beautiful illustrations on each page with each poem. The first poem was the longest one. I might read it at the end somewhere. And I think I want to read from most of these poets, yeah. Alright, so not everything in this book is poetry, because I just read a little poem from Nathaniel Hawthorne, and it's open form, and I'm like, you fucking bastard! Did you write open form poetry? But then I looked it up, and I'm like, did he? I don't think so. And I looked it up, and no, he didn't. He wrote closed form poetry. So this was just a little excerpt from his prose, and I'm thinking, why? But then the next page is from The Secret Garden, and it's just prose. So, and then it's poetry again. So some of these are not poems, but that's okay. All right, yeah, there's just a quote from Vincent van Gogh in here. If you truly love nature, you will find beauty everywhere. So, I mean, yeah, okay. All right, here's one. Utopia. There is a garden where lilies and roses are side by side, and all day between them in silence the silken butterflies glide. I may not enter the garden, though I know the road thereto, and morn by morn to the gateway I see the children go. They bring back light on their faces, but they cannot bring back to me what the lilies say to the roses, or the songs of the butterflies be. All right, I finished it. It's just this tiny little gift thing that people would probably give to one another, and it's lovely, but like a lot of it is not poetry. It's just quotes or prose. So this is the first poem that was in here that I like as well. It's from Come Hither, which I'm assuming is a longer poem. Art weary? Here's the place for weariness to rest. These flowers are herbs of grace, to cure the aching breast. Soft beds these mossy banks, where dewdrops only weep, when nature turns God to thanks, and sings herself to sleep. Art troubled with strife? Come hither, here's peace and summer weather. And it's by John Clare and 18th to 19th century. I think it's lovely, and I really enjoyed it. It's great. And you know what? In the morning, I'm gonna make some flour cookies. Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do. Good morning. Alice and I just went to the grocery shop to get ingredients because today you and I are gonna bake cookies. And I got, flour, butter, because I had nothing at home. And I got an egg, because I only need the one. I don't need a whole box, right? And I might not even use this one, because I'm thinking of a recipe for cookies without eggs. But I got one just in case. Oh, the way the cashier looked at me, she was like, here's your egg, at the end. And she's like looking at me like, and where should I? And I'm like, yes, thank you, just give it to me. And I just carried it home like this all the way. But yes, okay, so the ingredients we got for our cookies are butter, flour, lemon, just fresh lemon, confectioner's sugar, and vanilla. Hi, while you're watching me cook, this is only going to take 2 minutes. I'm going to spoil you for the next poetry book that I'm going to be reading in this video, and that's Ariel by Sylvia Plath. And let me read you one of my favorite poems from that collection, which is called The Moon and the Yew Tree. This is the light of the mind, cold and planetary. The trees of the mind are black, the light is blue. The grasses unload their griefs at my feet as if I were God, prickling my ankles and murmuring of their humility. Fumy spirituous mists inhabit this place, separated from my house by a row of headstones. I simply cannot see where there is to get to. The moon is no door. It is a face in its own right, white as a knuckle and terribly upset. It drags the sea after it like a crime. It is quiet. With the gape of complete despair, I live here. Twice on Sunday the bells startle the sky, 8 great tongues affirming the resurrection. At the end they soberly bong out their names. The yew tree points up. It has a Gothic shape. The eyes lift after it and find the moon. The moon is my mother. She is not sweet like Mary. Her blue garments unloose small bats and owls. How would I like to believe in tenderness? The face of the effigy gentled by candles, bending, on me in particular, its mild eyes. I have fallen a long way. Clouds are flowering blue and mystical over the face of the stars. Inside the church, the saints will be all blue, floating on their delicate feet over cold pews, their hands and faces stiff with loneliness. The moon sees nothing of this. She is bold and wild, and the message of the yew tree is blackness, blackness and silence. Some other ones that I liked from Ariel are The Applicant, Lady Lazarus, Tulips, Death and Co., Fever 103, The Bee Meeting, and The Arrival of the Bee Box. The last two are just about bees, and I love that. That is perfect. Alright, well, the cookies are ugly, but I mean, they might taste good. They didn't end up looking the way I wanted, and I think that's because I should have tweaked the recipe a little bit so that they would end up flat. I needed to make like entire shortbread, and then they would be just flat, and I could put the cream on top without it going places. But now I'm gonna leave them to dry so that it sets. I'm gonna go to my piercing appointment, and then we're gonna try them together and read some poetry. Look at them, they're so ugly. They taste okay though. They didn't come out not even close to what I wanted. Hello again. My ugly cookies are in the kitchen. I don't feel like eating them. But I made them and it's okay. I'll try again. I should have made shortbread. I don't know. I don't want to think about it. Right, so what I'm reading. I decided to read the poetry book that I've always wanted to read but could never buy anywhere. So I avoided it because I prefer to read in paper other than on the screen. And because I still cannot buy it anywhere where I can just have it immediately, I'm going to read it on script. And the book I'm talking about is Ariel by Sylvia Plath. This particular edition is edited by Frida Hughes, her daughter. And I read the foreword just now, and it's beautiful. It's everything I would have wanted to read in a foreword to Sylvia Plath's poetry, I think, because The Bell Jar is one of my favorite books of all time. It speaks to me on a lot of very personal levels, and I just also think that it's masterfully written and created, and I wanted always to know what Sylvia Plath's poetry was like. So I'm going to acquaint myself with some of her poetry now, and I'm going to get back to you in a bit. It's a little hard for me to talk about Sylvia Plath's poetry because I don't have a physical copy in front of me to reference, but I read about I read 5 poems so far, and I have a complicated relationship with free form and open form poetry, but I'm enjoying it. I enjoyed Couple quite a lot, and so many feelings are coming through, especially when you know a little bit about her life. It's intense. Good evening, friends. So, haven't baked anything since the cookies. We ate them. They were good. They looked but they were good. Tomorrow I might make brownies in the shape of little teddy bears. Poetry. I'm reading Ariel right now. And I don't want to talk about it because I don't like it. Am I just stupid? Am I dumb? Is that the problem? Because I don't like it. I don't like it because most poems I don't understand what they're about. Like, I have to read it 5 times to sort of glean some sort of sense. There are certain phrases, if they are taken out of context, they make sense to me. I relate to them, I understand them, but like, narratively, I know it's not narrative poetry, but there's something going on there, and it doesn't make any sense when you just read it all together. Like the poem Ariel, the titular one, did you know that it's about horse? I didn't, and I wouldn't have known if I didn't read the foreword by Frida Hughes, Sylvia Plath's daughter, which also makes me feel awful because she talks with such passion about her mother's poetry, with such understanding, that it's like, am I stupid? Is there something like, or just, is it imperative for you to play with that toy while I'm talking to the camera? Okay, so it's hard for me with this specific poet for some reason. And it makes me even angrier because The Bell Jar is one of my favorite novels of all time. I'm going to finish Ariel, obviously, but I looked up Frida Hughes as well, and she's a poet and artist, and I really like her art. And I read only one of her poems called My Mother, and it's beautiful, and you know exactly what it's about. Like, even if it wasn't titled My Mother, you would still know what's going on in it. And it's very, you know exactly what's happening, even though certain things are not spelled out for you. And I don't think that poetry needs to be, I said that weird, poetry needs to spell out its meaning specifically for you. Yes, it doesn't need to be clear all the time. It can be imperceptible. You can need to sit there and think about it. Like, one of my favorite poems is The Emperor of Ice Cream, and it's only one of my favorites because I read it so many times, because in my first encounter with it, I was like, what the fuck is it about? The Emperor of Ice Cream? What? I read it, and I was like, huh? What? I had to read an essay by somebody who was much smarter than me to explain to me that it's about a wake. And how... Am I just dumb? Is this all in vain? Am I just stupid and nothing's gonna come out of it? Okay, let's move on.
What I'm doing here is I'm just rolling out puff pastry. I cut it into pieces. And then you can take any kind of berry, frozen or fresh will do. I took frozen black currants. So you just cut pieces of rectangular pieces of your puff pastry, roll it out or stretch it out a little bit. Then you put the berries in the middle and roll it into a little roll. And when I insert the finished video, you will see that my pastries started leaking fruit juice from the bottom in the oven. And that's not that big a deal. But when it starts to burn in the oven, the juice, it becomes a little bit bitter. So that wouldn't happen. You have to pinch the bottom really, really well so that they don't start leaking out, the bottom and the side as well. When you roll the berries into the dough, it's just this kind of roll. You then squish it flat so they look kind of like cinnamon buns. And then I put them on some baking foil. I oiled it a little bit with vegetable oil, and then I just poured some sugar on top and just bake them until the dough looks ready or until the juice starts leaking out and bubbling on the foil, and they tasted pretty good.
Hi, it's really cool and autumny today, and Alice and I, she's over there in the leaves. Alice and I are going to the grocery shop to get some chocolate chips because I'm going to make brownies. By the way, are chocolate chips a normal staple in your grocery stores and at your home? Because I feel like that's just a very American thing. So if you're not from America or Canada, can you please tell me if chocolate chips are a normal thing in the shop? Because whenever I look up cookie recipes, the first 50 are chocolate chips. And if I don't want chocolate chip cookies, I have to specify what kind of cookie I want. What are you rolling around in? Is it shit? Because I just hope it's just autumn leaves. Because we just don't have them normally in shops. I know of one shop that sometimes has chocolate chips here, and I'm going there because normally when a recipe calls for chocolate chips and I desperately want to make it, I'll just buy a regular chocolate bar. What are you eating? Oh, it's a nut. I'll just buy a chocolate bar and just cut it up and put it in the recipe because, yeah. I want to make brownies with cookies on top because I'm obsessed with my new cookie pattern thing, and I don't want to just make cookies. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to make brownies and then cookies and then cream to put between the brownies and the cookies, if I'll have the energy, but I'll try. And I'm going to read some more Sylvia Plath. Sylvia Plath is not going well for me. I'm 1/3 of the way through Ariel, the Restored Edition, and honestly, most of the poems, I just don't get it. I do not like them. I do not like the way they are written. And I don't want to have to read 50 essays afterward to understand what she was talking about. Certain ones of them are very clear cut, for me at least, I understand what they are about, but then again, that might not be what she was writing them about. There might be some other sense that I personally take from them because certain words or phrases resonate with my own personal issues. And there's nothing wrong with that. Poetry and literature and art in general is interpretive, and that's normal. And it's a good thing, but it feels to me a little bit, I don't know, when the New York Times writes that Sylvia Plath's poetry changed the face of modern poetry, I'm like, is it a good thing? Hello. Today, for the very first time in my life, I am going to make pastry with yeast. I've been afraid of yeast for my whole life. I thought it was too complicated. And when I looked at my mom baking with yeast, it just seems like black magic to me. I don't know how people do that. But a friend of mine, hi Tanya, she started baking bread recently, and she's so good at it. You should see that bread. Actually, here's the bread. Here is the bread that my friend Tanya makes. And I'll link her Instagram down below. She taught me how to do yeasty pastry, and I'm going to make some pastry and put it to rise so that in the evening I can make pizza. Also, poetry. I'm reading Homebody by Rupi Kaur right now, and I have emotions about it, but it's hard to talk. I feel like I need to sit down and address a lot of them because it's very hard to rate a book where on the page in poetry format certain very hard and emotional things and trauma are being discussed, personal trauma of this author, and which I respect putting that on paper for everybody to see, to live it out. But at the same time, I still have a bit of an issue with the format of the poetry.
Hi again. So, a few months later, after I finished reading all of the books and filming all of the videos, I'm editing the video now, and I realized that I never actually talked about Ariel at length. I'm gonna try and keep this short. I don't know if I have a lot to say about it because I feel like I'm not smart enough to talk about it. I enjoyed Ariel. I rated it, I don't remember, 3 or 4 stars on Goodreads. I don't remember, but it felt weird rating it because while I didn't enjoy a lot of the poems, I appreciated the way they were structured. Uh, some of them I didn't like that much, and they annoyed me a little bit because it's that kind of modern poetry that is a little bit too disjointed for my liking, but it was still full of substance. And I know it's said about Sylvia Plath's poetry that it completely turned the way that modern poetry was heading. And I feel like I need to look into that a little bit more. And I need to look into modern poetry a lot more to understand it better. Further on in the video, I'm going to be really bashing on some modern poetry, but there are still different types of modern poetry. And I think that Sylvia Plath was a good poet. I enjoyed quite a few of her poems, and I think that I will be returning and rereading some of them in the future. But her prose still stands much higher in my esteem, I think, than her poetry. But I'm glad that I read it. I understand a little bit more about the universal body of poetry now, I think. And it was a good experience. Yes, and I think I would recommend it to anyone who's interested in poetry, whether or not you like that kind of thing, just for your general education on the subject. Hi. So my last read of this video, Homebody by Rupi Kaur, DNFing it halfway through. I really thought that I could plow my way through it, that I could make myself read it and try to enjoy it and find something there for myself, but I'm sorry to say that it's awful. Even though I DNF'd it, like I couldn't just mark it as DNF and just remove it in my Goodreads, so it's technically marked as read, but I am not going to count it towards my end of the year goal, even though Goodreads counts it, and I gave it 1 star because for me it deserves only that. Unfortunately, I think it's terrible. I think it's really bad. And I read Milk and Honey before, and I thought it was bearable, I suppose. And yes, it feels a little bit bad to me to rate Homebody 1 star because it's full of visceral feelings of the author, a lot of trauma that she put on page to relive it through poetry and share it with us and show us that yes, we are not the only ones who experience the horrible things that we experience sometimes to make us feel not alone. And I appreciate every single sentiment in it, but 2 lines or 3 words separated by spaces are unfortunately not poetry. I know that I am a literary snob, and I know that a lot of people don't like this kind of opinion, and there will be people that will be angry by this, but I'm sorry, it's not poetry and it's bad. I understand that sometimes we might want to write something to express a feeling in a literary genre, and the feeling that we have, the thought that we have, is not enough for a short story or a novel, and we feel like poetry is the best medium for it. But the way we use poetry I feel should correspond with the hundreds of years of accumulated knowledge and stylistical choices on poetry. I understand that every form of art evolves with humans and with our world, but sometimes I think the evolution need not take the simplistic stance that it takes quite often in modern times. And I think that a lot of modern poetry is unfortunately not poetry. It wants to be that, and I appreciate that, but no. So yes, unfortunately I'm ending this video on a sad note, but at least I proved to myself once again that modern Instagram, Tumblr poetry is not for me. So in the future, I will try to avoid it, and I will only pick something like that up if I have a chance to read a couple pages in a bookshop and it sounds incredibly interesting. So yes, I hope you enjoyed this first episode of Pastry and Poetry. I hope you liked all my pastries. I hope you found all the poetry I read interesting. And please let me know if you're going to try and make any of the pastries I made in this silly video, if you read any of the poetry that I read and what you think of it. And if you have any favorite poetry of yours that you would like to recommend me for next episodes, I would be delighted. I'll see you soon. Slava Ukraini!